So coming back to the thinking process, and we're going to look at a interesting game from the French defense. Let me go ahead and give it to you from this perspective. So this was an extremely important game for Nigel Short, as back in the day, and we still kind of use it today, there were tournaments of significance. So you got the national championship of a country, and FIDE has like 188 countries. So, good number of national championships, good number of champions. Then, after the national championships, if you win or you're second place in that, or you're like super high rated, you get invited to the interzonals. And interzonal is like all of these like super strong guys that are winners of national championships. Do what? Yeah, that would be like one zone. So say there's like 4 zones on the planet, and like North and South America is one zone. Well, then the winners of the interzonals end up being in the candidates. Then they play matches against each other. The winner of the candidates ends up being the challenger to the World Championship. This is the last round of the interzonal. And Nigel Short is black against Grandmaster Gurevich. Both of them around 2,600 FIDE at the time, which put them in like the top 10, 15 guys in the world, because 2,600 back then, 1990. So Short needs to win with black in order to qualify. If he doesn't win, you don't get to go to the candidates. So this is like a must-win game for black for Short. So we'll start off with his opponent's opening decision. He knows if he chooses a drawish opening and plays for a draw, I think all he needed was a draw in order to qualify. He's hoping that Short will overpress. Now, the reason I love this game, you have to understand the context of the game, because if you don't understand that Short absolutely has to win, this is a major career thing for him, then this is just another game. But this is a classical end game in chess that they reach, and understanding it, as well as I was very, very impressed, because I've been in those pressure situations where you're in a must-win or must-not-lose situation, and it affects your play. And he really showed his class as a player and showed why he deserved to go on to go into the candidates. He caught some breaks in the candidates. He beat Karpov and beat Gelfand, and this was when Karpov had played 3 World Championship matches with Kasparov back-to-back-to-back. The last one was in 90, and then Short goes on to face Kasparov to get into one of the worst butt whoopings ever in World Championship history. When Kasparov found out Short was going to be his challenger, or when they asked him who's going to win the candidates, he said it's going to be Short, and it's going to be Short. And I was like, And Kasparov absolutely ripped Short a new one. I think Short only won 1 game out of like their 20 games. Yeah. And Kasparov was +7 or something. He was smacking him around. But yeah, it's the style of play. Both of them play in the same type of style. And Short was insane and going into Sicilians with him, and he's just getting mauled in all the games. But that's neither here nor there. We have the task at hand. So, as a refresher, what are the 4 questions of the thinking process? Pawn levers number 4. So pawn levers are plans. So let's apply it to the position as we're going here. C5 would be the only pawn lever, but it's a risky pawn lever, right? Okay, let's go to number 3, and that is, what part of the board should we be playing on? In this type of position that's open, you have the choice of all 3 categories, so that question really doesn't help. That question is going to be very beneficial when it's coming to locked pawn structures, but in this case, we have a pawn lever, but I don't necessarily feel too strongly about it. I am looking at, where to play. I don't feel too strongly about that either. Now, then we go to exchanges. What type of exchanges do we want to make? Because there's only one exchange right now that is glaring to me based off the pawn structure. And see, it's funny because after writing...
You're bad light squid bishop?
You bad bishops, absolutely. And see, this is one of those ironic concepts. And I spent the first basically chapter of my French book explaining this concept. There's good bishops and bad bishops, and there's active bishops and inactive bishops. And you can have overlap between these concepts. So, a good bishop it agrees with the pawn in the center, meaning that this bishop is going to be able to attack the fixed pawn in the center. The bad bishop is only going to be able to defend your pawn in the center, and it can never interact with the opponent's pawn that's stuck. That's what makes it the bad bishop, the fixed pawn structure. Now, in the long term, the more pawns that get fixed on the opposite color of your bishop, the weaker your bishop becomes. That means, logically, the more pawns you're getting stuck on the same color as your bishop, meaning it can't be a bishop and slice through the position. It has no targets, and it's nothing but a defensive piece. So you can understand by hearing these concepts, you go, that sounds like a pretty bad piece. That's a pawn with a funny hat. That's not a bishop. So then we go active versus inactive. Typically in the French defense, we have a pawn here. This bishop only has one square to move to. It would be an inactive bishop. Here, it's clearly an active bishop because he has the ability to move out. So we get the definitions of bishops. And that's all you need to know. And here, you're absolutely right. That is the significant point that you need to notice. Now, just because this is the bad bishop, we don't necessarily just want to trade it off all willy-nilly, Like, oh, I'm going to trade the bishop for this knight or something. Not necessarily. Absolutely. That's the goal. Bishop for his good bishop. I want to trade my bad bishop for his good bishop. And legitimately, when I wrote the chapter on playing against the exchange variation of the French, every single thing that white does, I think objectively it's actually easier to play black in the exchange French, because think about the concept of martial arts like judo. You're using the momentum of your opponent and whatever they're doing against them. The momentum and the energy that they have. So as soon as he chooses a line, we are going to choose a counterweight. We're not going to copy. If you copy, you end up making a draw. So when we see knight f3, we need to ask our first and most important question, which is, what is the most annoying move? Excellent. So, understanding the position and how we broke it down, that we do not want to copy, we want to create imbalances. Even though the pawn structure is symmetrical, we're looking to create imbalances because let's put ourselves in the shoes of Grandmaster Short here. We have to win because this would be huge for our career. So 2 candidate moves. Bishop g4 is one candidate move. What's another one? Bishop e6. Bishop d6. Okay. Both of those are fine. Bishop d6, he can go bishop d3 and he can start copying you. You may be able to put the knight on e7, but I like bishop g4 because it says, my bishop's better than your knight. It's a pin, etc. Now here, Gurevich played like a super passive, like nothing line. And I like this line because Short actually had a game against Kasparov here after this game happened, because clearly Kasparov prepared it. Kasparov went queen e2, queen e7, bishop e3, knight c6, h3, knight c3, castles, castles, f6, g4. And does this look like an exchange French? No. Right. So, I mean, it's a variation in the exchange French, but it's not very popular. Kasparov likes aggressive, nasty positions. All we did was trade a pawn. Now, people are constantly like, the exchange French is drawish and boring. Only if you make it that way. White, or one side can be playing for a draw, and the other side can be playing to make it active and messy. You have to understand how critical it is. That's why it's so important with this type of game to ask, what is the most annoying move? And bishop g4 is an excellent start. Well, he goes h3. Then we have to ask the question, what exchanges do we want to make? And you know this is your bad bishop, so I think some people would cash in here and be like, okay, I'm going to trade my bishop for the knight because I know that's my bad bishop. But if you're trying to win, are you actively trading pieces? No, you're keeping tension because it gives your opponent more opportunities to go wrong. And especially your bishop is better than the knight. So we keep the tension. And we're provoking something like, okay, if he plays g4, that's only going to benefit us in the long term. Because as soon as he plays g4, that means to me that he's going to castle queenside. So then I choose my scheme of development. Instead of playing knight c6, I'm going to go c6, I'm going to castle kingside, and then I'm going to go b5, a5, and I'm going to attack over there. As soon as I see a move like g4, this is like a boxer telegraphing a punch. I'm going to hit you in the face. And then as soon as he rears back, you're like, okay, I'm going to move out of the way. You've got to think about this, like, this is that internal dialogue that we discussed that Botvinnik was recommending. On your opponent's time, after you play bishop h5, if he's thinking here, you are thinking, you know, if he does something like g4, what part of the board am I playing on? That's where the c6, b5, a5 plan comes from, because he's telegraphing that his king is not going to be safe in the center. It's not going to go kingside. He's going to go queenside. So let's go ahead and set up that attack now. Logic. That's what Botvinnik was talking about. So then when bishop e2 happens, what is the nettlesome / annoying move for black? And I really think the thinking process works a lot better in simple positions, because those are the harder ones. Because we have so many natural, normal moves we can make here, but there's only one best scheme of development to give us the most optimal chances. And remember, I want two candidate moves. I want you to compare them. And I want you to ask, you know, does it answer the question, what's annoying? This one's harder because I don't see anything that is going to put pressure on him immediately and make him solve a practical problem. So we need to go for optimal development here. So we know we need to develop our minor pieces. So let's do some logic-based questioning. If I'm going to move this knight, where should it go? And here's how I logically answer that question, because that one's a hard one. I'm waiting to see where he moves this knight. I'm going to go the opposite location. If his knight comes here, I'm going to go c6, and then I'm going to play knight d7. If his knight goes here, I'm going to play knight c6, and he's going to go c3. I want imbalances. Neither move is inferior. You just want to make sure that you're doing the opposite to generate counterplay. So we're going to wait on that guy. Yeah. And then when we come over to this guy, if we play knight f6, that looks inferior. If we play knight e7, that blocks in the bishop. So logically, by process of elimination with our minor pieces, bishop d6 is what he played in the game. It's most active. And knight e5. We go, okay. Not much choice here. We have to exchange. He chooses to exchange. Now, queen e7. If queen e7, he's going to go knight f3 or knight d3, and white gets exactly what he wants. He keeps trading down to make the draw that he needs to qualify. So are we concerned with queen b5 check? Give me a line on why queen b5 check will be ineffective for white. Okay, so after queen b5 check, knight bc6. Okay, let's say if I start with queen takes b7, what do you do? I like even better knight d4 because you're threatening knight c2 as well as bishop takes e5. And the same principle is going to work on queen b5 check, knight bc6, knight takes c6, knight takes c6, queen takes b7, knight takes d4. And the funny thing about that position is the queen can't move anywhere to check you. There's no targets. You have an attack on c2, and the queen can't come back to defend that. So he's got to play a move like king d1 or knight a3. And after queen e7 check and you castle, black's definitely winning there. I mean, it looks good. Every single one of black's pieces is developed, and he's got his queen off sides. Yeah. So easy to understand why he didn't go for that. And short wanting to avoid things, you know, gets out of the way. Bishop f4. So when we're talking about the concept of annoying, it's stopping him from doing what he wants to in the position. With his last move, what does white want? Because that's so important in our thinking process to understand. Do what? Absolutely. He wants to trade his bad bishop for our good one. And it's going to be two knights versus two knights, and like everything is symmetrical. There's no imbalances of the pieces. It's super equal. I could probably draw this against an elite GM if I'm allowed to trade, the bishops off here, because it's very, very hard to win. I mean, I've had these types of positions and lost, but whatever. That's beside the point. 2,600 guys are good. 2,500, I could draw them here. Yeah, I'm pretty confident. But so under that logic, we have to go back to our question number 2. What exchanges do I want to make here? And let's evaluate, because I think a lot of the times in simple positions like this, people have the wrong mindset. Because imagine, here's a very basic example of mindset according to the current position that we're in. If you think about it, the way that we treat an opening and middle game in regards to our king is very different when compared to the end game. We have to keep our king safe at pretty much all times during the opening and middle game, because there's lots of pieces on the board that are swarming around and he can get mated quickly. Think about the concept of the 4-move checkmate. But then in the end game, we turn that concept on its head, and the king is an attacking piece pretty much as soon as the queens come off the board. Understand this type of principle applied, that if you have the mindset when you're in an end game and you're treating it like a middle game, that, I need to keep my king safe, you're going to miss some huge nuances in the position to play the most accurate chess. So here, you have to have the correct mindset in order to try to play for a win. In-game thinking. Knight f5. What does knight f5 do? c3? Or I go, c3 first, and then I'm going to play something like knight d3, following up to be like, do you want to make the trade that I desire? So, knight g6, I'm going to play knight takes g6, and after h takes g6, we're going to trade bishops. So not only are you giving him what he wants, you're doubling up your pawns and simplifying it for him. So that's definitely not it. So here's an interesting one. Good bishop, bad bishop. We see pretty soon he's going to be able to trade his bad bishop off as soon as he's allowed to move this knight. So under this type of logic, okay, excellent. He's not going to be able to move the knight very easily, right? That's what Short played in the game. Now he goes queen g4. Next phase of the process. This next move sets the tone for the rest of the game. And if you can find this move, you understand why black is better here. And it will be a generalized theme. It's not always the best move that is going to get you a win. And even here, I bet if I turn on the engine's going to say that, this is like roughly equal. But there is a fine point here that is in-game thinking. Because there's middle games and then there's end games. And even though there's queens on the board here, we can treat this like an end game. So the most significant question is, what exchanges do we want to make for the long term in mind? And why is bishop e5 the move that Short played in the game, and why is it so strong and so significant here?
Because if bishop takes e5 or d5, then it's just another pawn stuck on the c.
And yeah, either way, his bishop's still a bad bishop forever. And our goal, we want a position where it's going to be knight versus bishop. That's it. A pure knight versus bishop endgame, because he's stuck with his bad bishop forever, and we have a knight in a semi-open position. We only traded one pawn. Guarantee we can make our knight better than the bishop in the long term. And this is a classical theme in the French defense that you need to be completely aware of. And when you're playing simple games. The reason I wanted to show you this game to start with is because of this theme. How often are you thinking in regards to, well, I'm not going to beat my opponent tactically in this game. This is clear. So I got to beat him in the end game. How am I going to beat him in the end game? Making exchanges to make sure my pieces are going to be better than his in the long term, and I got to outplay the guy. When you're not sure, the rule is don't trade. Here, I'm sure this is the right way to go, because if I don't do this, he's going to be able to trade his bishops, and he gets everything that he wants. And it's going to be a draw. We have to play for a win. That's why Short made the right call here. Yeah, go ahead and stop this whole getting mated thing. That's kind of important. And this, it all of a sudden gets easier. It's an amazing concept. And you guys are just like ratcheting out the good moves now, because it goes from, like, sometimes you don't need the thinking process. We got the plan. We know we'd like to trade knights. We know, like, okay, here's another good question. Do we want to trade queens in this position?
Yes.
Yeah, because we know in the long term, the knight's going to be better. And the queen for white is the only thing that can interact with the light square diagonals. So if we remove the queens, the diagonals don't matter for us. Our knight is going to dominate. Queen f3. So I like the idea of knight e4 here until you understand, and this is also an endgame principle that is seen in rook and queen endgames. The ability of the queen to swing over. This concept is the reason he didn't play knight e4 here. He first just shores up his center. So when queen b3 is played, based off of the exchanges we know we want to make and what we want to do in the position, what's the best move? Easy money. So because white is just trying to make a draw, he just keeps trading. He's not thinking about the long-term consequences. This is one of the best players in the world in the time period, and he's just trading pieces to make a draw. When you ever have the mindset of, I'm playing for a draw, you are playing for two results. You're either going to get your draw or you're going to lose. Because your opponent, he's trying to win. He's going to play for two results as well. He's going to get his win, or he's going to make that draw and be unsatisfied. What mindset seems is more appropriate for any game you're playing ever? Number two, you know? So a3, making it where he can move his rook. Now we're back to that idea. And the guy just keeps being helpful. Now, why would c3 be a poor move for white here for the long term? Yeah, rook e2, but think about the dynamics of the knight versus bishop here. Yeah, c3 puts another pawn almost permanently on the same color as the bishop, making the bishop worse. And then the knight's going to be able to journey to c4. And once he gets there, b3 makes everything fall apart. So you don't want to touch the b or c pawns because it's going to create those long-term weaknesses. He goes rook d1 to start with. b5 in order to make sure that the pawns aren't moving. Also, getting another pawn on the opposite color of the bishop, making your pawn structure stronger, his weaker. King f1. White begins an endgame principle. Activating the king because he's going to be a valuable piece. Also, making sure your rook doesn't go to e2, which it wasn't valuable in the previous position because he would simply go rook a to c1 and then on the following move play king f1 and kick your rook out, or, you know, etc. So in this position, now we're in a pure endgame. And this is exactly the type of position you asked to train in. This is critical because using our thinking process, it's going to help you find the correct plan. Rook a4 is going to tickle the weakness, which could provoke something like c3, which is what we're looking for. I like rook a4 here. It's a move that we can play at any point in time that says, you know, I'm needling. And then you can just go right back. Doing this position before, one of my students recommended b4. Tell me why b4 is a bad move. See the full combination. Puzzle rush. Bishop d6, yeah, excellent. You see all that, Derek? All right, so if b4, follow with me, pawn takes, rook takes, rook takes, rook takes pawn, rook check, knight f8, bishop d6, and you're losing the knight. Okay. b4 is not going to work because of that. And here's the thing with your calculation. I don't know if you're making this type of mistake, but you definitely need to keep it in mind. That if that tactic that we just calculated one time doesn't work here, it's not going to work in almost any scenario, right? Unless we fix the problem of the back rank.
So, h6?
What would be more accurate here, h6 or f6?
Yeah, because we did get to that.
Also, it is going to take away a very important square, the e5 square, from his bishop. So we see this idea with b4, and it's a tactic that doesn't work. So we create a scenario which it may work. But we may not necessarily want to trade down, give his rook activity. It's just an idea. But from this idea, I was able to find the move that was played in the game, f6. And we're also setting up with the ability to activate our king. Also an important point. Now here, another salient feature in the position, in-game thinking. We have 3 viable options of where to move our rook. Well, I'll say 4. When we have 4 options with a rook move, there's only one best rook move. Compare. Here's a pure use of the thinking process. We have 4 moves in this position which are reasonable. Compare and give me the best rook move.
Rook e6.
Why is rook e6 the most superior move?
Gives us the ability to go rook a8.
Yep, because if you played rook e8, you couldn't double anymore. Good. Rook e7 seems, it's okay, but he has the option of bishop d6. Yep. Rook e6 takes away options from the bishop. It's a follow-up of our previous move with f6, taking away 1 square for the bishop. We're just like gradually dominating that bishop, even though it's an open position. It's a kind of ridiculous concept, right? Rook e6, what was played in the game. Excellent. And that's the first reaction, but this is where the thinking process would serve you well. Because you go, rook a e8, rook takes, other rook to e1. Do we want to make this trade? Do we want to trade off all the rooks, or do we want to keep 1 rook on? Why? Because it's more important for you to answer the why, because when you get positions like this in the future, you're going to make the same decision. Is it good to keep the rooks, or, you know?
Maybe like more long term, you bet
Right. And compare the A rooks. Black's rook is clearly dominating the other A rook, the white A1 rook. And remember, let's go back to that idea that you mentioned with rook A4. Rook A4 could always, kind of needle. King F7 is more accurate because think about our last move. We want to activate the king, so why not use the king to defend? Then we ask, King F7 or King D7, and why?
King d7.
Why?
Gives us more
Limits the bishop. Gives no entry points for his rook. I like it. It's perfect. So King E2. Now we're back to that idea, rook E8 check, rook takes. Why? No need. We chose this line for a reason. Knight E7 to start the reroute. That's pretty good. This move is probably the most difficult move in the game from a positional standpoint. But as soon as you see the move, it's extremely logical, and you go, oh yeah, it makes sense. And think about our last move when we chose between the difference between King F7 and King D7. The rationale on why King D7 was the better move is that it was taking 2 potential reasonable squares away from the bishop. Can we make the bishop worse? And we define making the bishop worse here in this way. If more of white's pawns were to be forced on the same color of the bishop, his bishop is going to become worse. If we can force more of our pawns on the opposite color of the bishop, that is also making his bishop worse. Can we do this on the queen side?
all our pieces are already on. All our pawns are already on the vice versa, no?
Okay. On the king side, we can make changes, but I don't want to move the f pawn because he's going to go bishop e5. logically. We're not doing anything with h-pawn. So the two candidate moves here are rook a4 or h5. And rook a4 is probably going to be met by bishop f2. And then I'm just going to go back, and he's going to go back, and he's going to offer a draw, you know, that type thing. h5 says, if I play h4, I'm going to make your bishop worse at some point. So I'm keeping that idea in reserve. I'm also going to limit and restrict your pawn structure, because if I can complete h4, he can't ever move the g-pawn without us taking en passant, which will create two new weaknesses which are valuable in any type of endgame. So simple, effective endgame play here. When you can make a move that does nothing but positive things with no drawbacks, that's the best move in the position. King d3. That was a landmine square. Because now, after h4, he needs to stay on the long diagonal. Because if he plays bishop f2, we have knight f4 check. And we win the g-pawn. So king d3 was just an inaccuracy. Now what? Let's use Silman's thinking process. Silman's thinking process it's an excellent book called Amateur's Mind. The premise of the book, he takes positions like this, and he asks players that are like 1200, 1600, and 1800 to tell him what they were thinking in as many words as possible, and then he shows what the master played in the game. And it's an interesting observational book, because when you're reading the lower rated player's thought process, it's typically wrong because of significant reasons, and then when you get to the master's thought process, you know, you get it right. I like the way the book was written, because here he would talk about the concept of imagining making your pieces as strong as they can be. Now, our knight is stronger than the bishop. That is the catalyst of the position. Where is the ideal square for the knight? So what is the most optimal path for us to get to c4? Yep. Knight e7 to c8 to b6. And if a move like b3 happens, he's clearly going to have problems. So, knight e7. And that's the most flexible move anyway. Sometimes you want to go knight f5 and see what's going on. So either knight f5 or knight c8 should be our ideas that we're keeping in reserve here. So he goes bishop f4. And I really like this move by white, because a forcing move that comes to mind here is what? Locks everything on the dark squares. Now here's the thing. Once you make this rationalization, you will be stronger in endgames about touching your pawns. When you play g5, which is an absolutely atrocious move in this position, he's going to come back and say, we come back to our plan with knight c8, f4, exclam. Now, the game should be roughly equal. These fixed pawns are weaknesses in the long term. This bishop's going to reroute, come alive, and you've got some serious problems in the position now. You went from just a stylistically winning endgame with your beautiful knight versus the bad b to one inaccuracy like this can throw everything away. Now you're struggling. And g5 is such a natural move to make, because in an opening or a middle game, those are great moves. In an end game, it's a commitment which we can't abide. Knight f5. And remember another Silman principle of endgames. This comes from Silman's complete endgame course from beginner to master. In the master chapter, all he talks about and he gives examples of is the concept of cat and mouse. And I mean, good principles, they never die. So yeah, review. We will come back to same concepts. Now, if you can do it in 2 or do it in 10, are we in a hurry with the knight here? Can he make changes in the pawn structure? So all he can do is sit. Now this is where I feel that you've been struggling with your time management. Once this gets through the thick head, you're going to be good to go in these positions, and you're going to start murdering people, and you're going to make the climb. You want to make quick needling moves with the knight. Because if you see the pattern that your opponent's playing slowly here, I can play my knight back to e7, play my knight back to g6, knowing that it's bad, and knowing that there's no consequences. This is cat and mouse at its finest, because your opponent's going to get frustrated. And when they get frustrated, what are they going to do? They feel the need to make a change in the position, and it's going to make it worse. This is the pure boa constrictor style of Karpov, of, putting the squeeze on somebody until they break. Speed in these positions. You're having the trouble when you get to these positions in the past of trying to find the most accurate plan and just, being a perfectionist, which much can be said for striving for perfectionism, but from a practical standpoint, it can really, really punish you. That's why you're getting in time trouble is one of the many reasons, and it can cut down dramatically in this type of endgame. So it goes bishop d2. All right, well, b6, because?
Might want to play c6, 5 later?
Yeah, we're at the point in the position to where nothing doing. Now, in my opinion, the reason Short didn't shuffle around with his knight, which I believe would be good technique, like I would have went knight d6, knight c4, and then once he plays rook b1 to defend, I'm going to come back. And then I'm going to do the plan with b6 that he played. Just a test. Because does that affect anything? No. And you can do it quick, you can do it effective, and your opponent has to worry about it. I love that. That's the very best. And somewhere in here, I would play rook a4 and then come back. Can you see how, if you see that your opponent, like both of you are in this position and both have 20 minutes, and you see that your opponent's using 30 seconds a move, I'm going to find maneuvers like this to work you on the clock. Because if I can get you down to under 5 minutes, you're going to start making impulsive decisions and you're going to beat yourself for me. Psychology of competition. Doing this is you playing at a higher level, because every master I know does this. The reason I feel that Short probably played b6 here is because they were playing a time control that had an increment, like every time you move, you get 30 seconds added. Otherwise, he's a true professional in every sense of the word with the end games. So I would expect for him to play this type of maneuver. So b6. Rook a2. Because, he's just Weston. Rook a4, again, he doesn't have to do anything. He's just going to come back. Continuation of the plan. You want to take and undouble my pawns? Critical moment. We have some calculating to do here. What are the two moves you consider?
C4.
And?
C6.
Which one?
King C6. Or King D6. Or maybe.
What are the moves that make changes in the position? C4 and B4 are the moves that make changes. So you have to consider those. Now, you immediately discarded B4 in your mind because you were like, well, if he takes and I take, that just ruins my pawn structure.
Oh, but then you get open 5. So,
Understand, sometimes you got to give a little to get a little, and a lot of people just discard that idea with B4 immediately. But that's another error in in-game thinking. We have less, so we're more materialistic typically when we're playing in games because we're like, well, I don't want to give up anything. That is the time when it is most valuable to consider giving up things. If C4 check immediately, he just plays King C3, and then I don't know that we're getting anything done. B4 immediately, though, when he takes, now we go C4. What was his plan? Like, what's the follow-up here for black? I think some people would go, well, I'm going to play B5 and lock down the position.
wait, what happens if DC after B4? So DC5, C take. So he has to take.
He has to take here with check. And then I'm going to play B5, and then that pawn's going to be a permanent weakness.
Won't he have so like a King G2?
Well, probably more accurate is D4. Or can I just win on the spot here trading everything?
Okay.
I can win on the spot trading everything, yeah. Yeah, I hadn't thought about this position when looking at the game before, but I mean, it's definitely definitely valid to ask. Bow. Knight D6. Pressure, because when we play Knight B5, nothing else can defend him. I want to see a move like Bishop D2 here, just so I can, like when you play the knight move, you do the little twist. So he gets open file, but we're at that phase of the game where it all falls apart. And here's another important moment: where to put the king? Well, the queenside pawns are taking care of themselves. You need to hold the F pawn. And regardless of if he gets a passer, your knight is going and king being over here is going to slow the progression of his pawns. Your pawns are they're on the move. And coming up the board. And here, Gurevich resigned because after rook h7, knight e3 seems crippling. Overall takeaways of this game. Even drawish positions, you can play for a win in. Why? The goals that you set before a game. I must win. Short gave himself everything he could get out of the position. Now, playing for a win with black in an exchange French isn't exactly an easy task. If he can do it, in a game playing against one of the world elite who is playing for a draw from move 1. Honestly, in more complicated positions from our opening repertoire that we're working on, it's going to be a lot easier if you have the correct psychology. So be asking, what does this position call for? If you know that if you're playing a Sicilian and it's a white side and it's an open Sicilian, you know what's called for in the position. You got to attack. If you wait around and just trade pieces, your attack's gone, you're going to get murdered. Because the Sicilian in and of itself for black is, I need to survive and I have a superior endgame. You got to beat him in the middle game. That should be your mindset. Hit him, All right. So that was a good one.